Good morning. I hope you all enjoyed last night. I missed it. I'm really sad. But I'm happy to be here with you today. My name is Emma Brandy, and I'll be chairing this session this morning. So just a quick reminder, please turn off mobile devices if you have them. Just take the next couple minutes to do that. That would be embarrassing if it went off. It's happened to me. So our first speaker today is Rebecca Ataman. She hails to us from Waterloo. She's just recently moved there to become an instructor for anatomy, pretty cool, at the University of Waterloo. So let me backtrack. So I asked all of the speakers a series of 5 questions, and so they answered them, and I'd like to share those answers with you. So first of all, Rebecca has her first canoeing memories from car camping at Mew Lake in Algonquin Park. Her whole family would go, and they'd spend days exploring the lake, looking for frogs, chasing animals. But one day, her grandfather said, "Let's go on a day trip." And for her, at that point, it felt like the biggest adventure, not only because she paddled for the whole day straight, but also because she was doing it with her grandpa. I also asked them what their favorite canoe trip meal is. Just checking, buying a little time here. Her favorite canoe trip meal is chili with cinnamon rolls for dessert, and the close second was freshly caught fish. She's just turned 25, and she's passionate right now about finding new opportunities, the Symposium being one of them. And she first found out about the Symposium from her parents, who have been coming for a long time. But of course, it was Alex who convinced her to join us today to share her canoe trip on the Firth River. How are we doing for AV?
Okay. So my name's Rebecca Ataman. My introduction was a few minutes ago. So this morning has taught us what I already know. Mornings are really hard. So I am really grateful you guys all decided to show up and listen to me early on this really dismal, rainy morning. Hopefully you can take away something from my presentation today. Oh, okay. So today I'll be presenting on the Firth River. So if we just get there, yep. Great. So today I'm presenting on the Firth River. So the Firth River is in the Yukon. It was my first time up there. So hopefully you guys take away something from this presentation about my first experience in the Arctic itself. So based off of past WC presentations I saw last night, as well as some I viewed online, I can honestly say I have no idea how I was the one off the Firth River trip to be voluntold into presenting today. I think I didn't do a full count, but I think there was about 7 or 8 of us, of the 15 people that were on the trip, that are here today. So thank you guys all for coming out and supporting me, yeah. So I'm in awe, really, of the vast wilderness experience collected in this room today, and I hope I can someday match that. Since I doubt I can teach many of you something new concerning wilderness tripping in general, I hope this presentation may instead allow you to either be inspired to try a trip in the Arctic, like I was, or relive your first experience in that region through my presentation today. Going to the Firth River included a series of firsts for me. It was both my first time in the Arctic and my first time whitewater rafting, and it's definitely a trip I would repeat in a heartbeat. Today I'm going to present to you the Firth River as I experienced it with inexperience. Before we go any further, I should explain. Before this trip, I had done a total of 16 days of whitewater canoeing, 3 of kayaking, and 0 of whitewater rafting. I made sure I did this really correct count for this presentation. 12 of those days came in, I guess it would have been 2015, when I went on a whitewater trip on the Pigeon River in Manitoba. So that was the vast amount of my experience was on that trip. But then here I was about to embark on a 12-day rafting trip, more in the middle of nowhere than I'd ever been, with people I did not know and had an average age of somewhere between 55 and 65, depending on whether I believed them when they told me their age. Needless to say, I definitely had to be talked into this trip, but I'm so glad that I was. Although I'm not so experienced on whitewater, as best as I can tell, I've spent over 350 days canoeing flatwater. I'm 25 now, so I like to think that is no mean feat. When I'm feeling especially pessimistic, I sometimes feel that I've seen all the wilderness landscapes that there are. But inevitably, there is something on every trip that surprises and inspires, as I'm sure many of you know. Based on the pictures and videos used to convince me to embark on this Arctic adventure, I thought I knew what I'd be getting into. But, like is so often the case, a picture can never seem to do real-life justice. So, many of you are probably thinking, where is the Firth River? I've never heard of it. There's a reason for that. According to the park rangers we talked to, an average of 30 people paddle down the river every year. In an average year, our group of 15 would have met half of that total. The reason for these extremely low numbers is due to the inaccessibility of the region and the short season in which it can be traveled. The only way to get there is to fly a little over an hour from Inuvik, which which you can see is the last stop on the Dempster Highway on this map. Basically, Inuvik then is the transportation hub for the entire northwest Arctic region. That means Inuvik is about 3,000 people large. So let's a little zoomed in more of the Firth River. The Firth River is the main river in Inuvik National Park, running from the Alaskan border, then turning north to drain into the Beaufort Sea at Herschel Island. This region became a national park for the protection of the porcupine caribou herd breeding grounds and the Inuvialuit cultural landmarks in the region. However, the unique geography of the region is just as important to preserve. This is one of the few areas in Canada untouched by the last ice age. So the land has not been smoothed by the receding glaciers. It has left 4 geographical regions in the river, which I experienced, and I think most people that aren't geologists would experience, as 3 distinct landscapes, each offering their own challenges and opportunities for us avid explorers. There are the British Mountains of the upper 1/3 of the river, the challenging water of the canyon in the middle, and finally the flat delta as the river meets the Beaufort Sea. Before I get to the actual paddling portion of this trip, the hour and 15-minute flight provided its own awe-inspiring moments and a little preview of what was to come. So this is a view from our plane of the Mackenzie River Delta. From this view, you can see that this delta stretches as far as the eye can see in every direction upon takeoff from Inuvik. From the window, all I could think of was how long it must take for the water to get to the ocean, which was such a zigzagging and patchwork route. Looking at this view was both mesmerizing and frustrating as I tried to trace the path of the river northwards. The delta quickly transitioned to mountains as we entered Inuvik National Park. We flew low enough to catch glimpses of small herds of caribou as they followed the trails lining the mountains. What fascinated me the most was the fantastic geography of the region, some of which, like this mountain, almost bordered on the ridiculous. After 3 separate flights, we got ourselves and our gear to the top of the Firth at Margaret Lake. Although I wouldn't recommend the landing, the flight was beautiful in and of itself. Since we had extra space in the last flight, a couple from town actually hopped on the plane just to experience the flight there and back. Finally, getting on the river invigorated us all, so we headed out on what would be the first of many hikes up nearby mountains. Although there were hiking suggestions on the map provided by Parks Canada, for the most part, we would pick a mountain or landmark we wished to get to and just point ourselves in that direction. The wide expanses and usual lack of trees meant hiking was more a matter of forcing yourself to pick only one destination, rather than worrying about getting lost. Although the landscape often looked gray from far away, while walking the peaks, color could be found all around us, as wildflowers found the most unlikely of places to grow. The sheer abundance of wildflowers and berries really surprised me. The growing season is so short, it's hard to imagine such colorful plants could even stand a chance so far north. The landscape of the British Mountain region of the river also provided eye-catching crags, which would often jut out from the cliffs lining the river, and served as nests for eagles, which we would spot wheeling above. Some of the more adventurous members of our group often use these features as convenient rock climbing challenges. Although this trip was centered around the Whitewater the Firth could offer us, I found that I never felt more connected to the land around me than when I was hiking up the mountains that hugged the river from all sides. The view from the peaks only emphasized the untamed beauty of the region, and to me, it is what defined my time on the Firth. However, the pristine landscape didn't blind me to the potential dangers of the area. Being so far from any civilization was both invigorating and terrifying in equal measures. Besides the multitude of mountains on the upper portion of the river, ice sheets were relatively common, especially near the mountain streams. The upper reach, as marked on the Parks Canada map, describes this region as an ophis, which I hope I'm saying right, meaning ice sheet. These ice sheets were convenient for us, as we had to have some way to keep all of our food cold. Collecting ice chunks for the coolers became a daily routine. On the first real day of the trip, we discovered our favorite chore, fishing. Just before camp, one of the kayakers, Joe, snuck off to a good-looking mountain stream to test out the fishing there. He ended up pulling up to camp with his kayak half sunk under the weight of his catch. And this was his catch that day, so you can imagine, half an hour he was gone, didn't really know where he went, come back with this. My favorite part about fishing on the Firth was that it required absolutely no patience at all. Our self-imposed daily quota was 15 fish, the equivalent of 1 per person. We would catch 15 fish in 15 minutes when we stopped at the mouth of a mountain streams joining the main river. My favorite catch was always the Arctic char, which we found in abundance in the upper portion of the river. Downriver was dominated by the smaller grayling. That same day, we also had our first large animal sighting on the river, a freshly killed and eaten caribou. This caribou was right in the middle of our planned campsite. We decided it would probably be best to go a couple more kilometers downriver after seeing that it was only mostly eaten. We didn't want to be close by, so we decided to come back and finish the job. Our second day campsite was typical of many on the Firth, on a gravel bar, only slightly above water level. You would definitely be in trouble if there was rain overnight. The third campsite at Jode Creek was where our first run-in with Mother Nature began. A group of us were about 20 minutes out from the campsite, returning from our hike, when the rain started. It's amazing to me that half an hour earlier I was in my t-shirt, as you saw in that picture, but the rain brought with it quickly dropping temperatures and high winds. It ended up raining continuously for over 12 hours, swelling the river well past its normal summer levels. So here you can see where the river was swollen, and this image is the same river, same spot, the day before. Multiple times, the rafts had to be moved up to make sure they wouldn't be swept away. One particularly memorable time was in the middle of the night, while it was still raining. Adding to my misery was a steadily dropping temperature that ended up hovering around 0, as evidenced by the snow in the mountains the next morning. Although the rain stopped during the 4th day, the river continued to rise for over 24 hours after. We decided to wait it out and hope the river went down a bit before moving on. We were nearing the end of the mountain section of the river, and we can only imagine what the canyon might be like with this kind of water level. We spent our days waiting out the flood in the Tundra Tunnel, which some of you guys might have heard of or have experienced. In this tent, we were holed up out of the wind and rain to eat and pass the time singing along to the banjo and 2 guitars that were brought on the trip. On the last night at Jode Creek, we celebrated the return of the sun in relatively warm temperatures with a midnight party. And yes, we were all wearing sunglasses at midnight. When we were finally able to leave, the water level was still high, but the weather was perfect. Thankfully uneventful, the next couple of days brought with them rewarding wildlife sightings, including our first pair of muskox and a moose with a cultural hike, and as well as a cultural hike in which we saw the remnants of an Inuvialuit caribou fence. For those of you wondering what a caribou fence is, the Inuvialuit would drive the caribou herd into this area to cage them in, cutting off an escape route and making hunting them easier. Despite the wildlife and hikes we happily filled our days with, we were still concerned about the water levels. If the water was still high in the wider areas of the river, how high would it be in the narrow canyon sections? The The entrance to the 30-kilometer-long canyon is at the Sheep Slot campsite, which looks down onto the rapid of the same name. We plan to spend a rest day at Sheep Slot to hike the area, scout the rapids, and visit the ranger's cabin about 1 kilometer away at Sheep Creek. The hike ended up being quite a trek for the 5 of us that went. Our goal was to go up the tallest peak in the closest mountains to our campsite in an attempt to see the Beaufort Sea some 50 kilometers to the north. We found a small, rocky mountain stream that we decided to follow upwards, affording us a relatively easy climb and fresh water. After eating lunch, a little over halfway up, we ended up making it to the peak and were gifted with that small sliver of deep blue that was the sea. Although others of our group, namely my father, who's in the audience today, will maintain that you couldn't see the sea from there, I would like to point out that my eyes are considerably younger, so I probably had a bit of advantage there. Oh. On the way down the mountains, we stopped at the ranger's cabin and passed their landing strip. Yes, you heard right, landing strip, on the way. We all made sure to get pictures around the airport sign at the end of the runway. I have to say, Sheep Creek might have been the most scenic landing strip I've ever seen, but it definitely wouldn't offer the smoothest of landings. As our hiking group returned to the campsite, we were regaled with tales from the rest of the group. The other 10 members of the crew had gone out to scout the rapid and encountered a grizzly bear. They only noticed it when it was about 20 meters away or so. When it turned around, startled, it took a few steps toward them before recognizing the size of the group and took off. I can't say I was very upset to have missed out on that experience. The next day, we attended Sheep Slot, which you can see in this image here, the very beginning of it. Is by far the most difficult section of the trip. We had been looking at it for 2 days, as we'd been on the campsite that long at that point, hoping the water would drop, hoping the pillow on the far shore would become smaller and the margin for error larger. It was decided that the 3 larger rafts would attempt it. However, the smaller raft, which I was in, would portage 25 meters around the top rapid and act as a safety with the 2 kayaks on the trip. The very first raft that went down flipped enough to jump everyone out of it, but luckily, it righted itself quickly. The next 2 rafts made it down the section only slightly more gracefully, but in the end, they each made it through. The rescue mission of the first raft was on. Thankfully, no one was hurt, and equally thankfully, the whole thing was caught on video by multiple people. The rest of the day went very quickly as the high water through the already fast-moving canyon pushed us along at a breakneck speed. The day was spent navigating the many rapids, spotting the dull steep dotted along the cliffs, and the eagles wheeling overhead. It was hard to find spots to pull over in the canyon, especially in the high water. The only options were small slivers of gravel where mountain streams emerged with the river. This picture really shows how turned up the main river is, even days after the storm, and how clear the water of the mountain stream is going into it. We were moving so quickly down the canyon that we ended up blowing right by the campsite we were aiming for, and instead camped further downstream than expected on this larger gravel bar. Throughout the canyon, the wildlife is varied and spectacular, the Whitewater thrilling, but equally as interesting to me was the odd rock exposed in the canyon walls. I am no geologist, but I can tell you when I saw these huge variations of color, but also in types of rock. Some would crumble in my hands. I would find normal gray rock next to red or green. I thought going in through the canyon would be a bit dreary, hemmed in by tall gray walls on all sides, but the scenery was truly spectacular for all that it was wholly unexpected. The river rushes you through the canyon quickly, whipping you around the corners to the next set of rapids or to glimpse animals along the cliffs above. The next day, we exited the canyon and entered the delta. The delta is startlingly flat after the mountains we've been surrounded by for the past week. Only 2 features break up the landscape. I'm going to butcher this, but Eggsyak, maybe, meaning the young mountain, which we affectionately call the Egg Mountain for obvious reasons. I just demonstrated. And the last mountain, both of which are largish hills. The Egg Mountain is especially interesting because of its cultural significance to the area. There is evidence of old hunting camps and blinds on all sides. Once at the top, it is easy to see why. the views of the delta from this easy-to-climb hill are unparalleled. Seeing the expanse in front of me for the first time was breathtaking. On that hike, we also spotted a grizzly bear on the ridge opposite us and saw fresh moose, caribou, wolf, and grizzly tracks in the mud near the river. Our last campsite was at the base of the last mountain, the final hill before the delta becomes completely flat. From this lookout, we scouted the river and planned how to get to the Beaufort Sea the next day. We could see the endless branches of the delta running into the large ice sheet before draining into the ocean. Maps of the delta are completely useless because both the river and the ice sheet change every year. We already knew that the final day of the delta would be challenging because of this branching and notorious problems with shallow water, but seeing the sheer size of the ice blocking the way was still daunting. The next day brought with it all the challenges we feared it would, but these were broken up by wildlife sightings and unexpected perks on the final campsite. We were finally able to get close to a pair of muskox as we were swept around a corner in the river. It is hard to grasp the sheer size of these animals in a picture. We ended up getting through the branches and the ice sheet without any major problems, although we did think we were stuck in the ice for a bad 15 minutes. Other than that, a raft would get stuck every once in a while and have to be pushed, but the kayakers were able to lead us to deep water despite the murkiness of it. After a hard day of paddling, we reached Nunalak Spit and promptly pulled out the last of the Sokolova. Sokolova, if you guys are unaware, is a Serbian alcoholic delicacy, if you believe the Serbians in the group. We spent the afternoon exploring the spit, which had ancient Inuvialuit structures to break the wind, as well as a cabin belonging to an early 20th century Arctic explorer. You can probably guess which of these structures is still intact. A few of us, myself included, made sure to swim in the Beaufort Sea just for the bragging rights. To be completely honest, the water of the river was much colder than the sea. So there's some encouragement for all of you who make it up to the Arctic Ocean. The next day, we flew back to Inuvik, flying along the coast before following the Mackenzie River south, a completely different route from how we flew into the Firth. This afforded us amazing aerial views of several muskox herds, as well as hundreds of beluga whales and small pods all the way down the coast, where the nutrients from the Mackenzie River Delta mixed with the salt water. Other interesting features we noted was a mobile oil rig, as you can see here, and some strange silos that we assumed had some importance to NORAD. It seems you really never do know what you'll find in the north. This 12-day trip down the Firth River brought with it challenges from the landscape around us, as well as Mother Nature raining down on us. The abundant and varied wildlife that was found around every corner could only be outdone by the dramatic landscape that underwent striking changes throughout our travel downriver. The river itself had a few rapids that required scouting. However, the majority were easily navigable in a raft without advanced planning. However, perhaps the best part of the entire trip is that there are absolutely no portages in the entire 130 kilometers stretch of the river. I challenge anyone to find a river with as much to offer as the Firth. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy.